I wouldn't normally share the private conversations I have with congregants, but this week one of our members, aged nearly 98, whom I will call David, and who came to the UK as a child of 14 on the Kindertransport from Vienna, told me a story, a real story about his life. And then he said to me, "Perhaps you can use this in one of your sermons." But first, this week's parasha, just keep you on shpilkas for a bit. Parashat Re'eh. It's the fourth Sedra of the book of Deuteronomy, and it begins with the words, Re'eh anochi noten lifnechem hayom bracha uklala. See, I set before you this day blessing and curse. Blessing if you obey the commandments of the Eternal One your God that I enjoin upon you this day, and curse if you do not obey the commandments of the Eternal One your God. In reading these verses at the beginning of this Sedra, we're reminded of another, perhaps more well-known passage later on in Deuteronomy and read on the morning of Yom Kippur. It also begins with the word Re'eh, see. Re'eh natati lefanecha hayom et hachayim ve'et hatov ve'et hamavet ve'et hara. See, I set before you this day life and prosperity, death and adversity. I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life that you and your offspring will live. Here is what Sforno, the 16th century Italian physician and Bible commentator, has to say on the opening words of this week's Torah portion. Pay attention, he says, and see that you don't go after things in a half-hearted way like the rest of the world. Indeed, remember that I, God, am setting before you this day blessing and curse, and these are the two extremes. The blessing is success and prosperity, more than you need of excellent quality, while the curse will bring about scarcity. You will have less than even your basic needs. The two of them are set before you. All you have to do is make the choice, says Sforno. Sforno focuses then on what we need to do in life. All you have to do is make a choice. One will bring blessing and abundance, the other scarcity and adversity. As for the second passage in Deuteronomy, Sforno goes a little further. This is what he says. When I said choose life, I did not mean that you should keep the laws for the sake of the reward in store for you, but that you should make this choice for the sake of true life. When I first read this commentary, I wondered what Sforno meant by true life, chayim be'emet, and I assumed that he meant this life. Choose life so that you and your offspring can have a long life and enjoy the fruits of the land, which was sworn to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that is certainly what the text of the Torah seems to mean, especially as there isn't really any concept in the Torah of the world to come. When you die, you sleep with your ancestors, and that's it. But then Sforno seems to contradict himself because he continues his commentary by saying, whatever satisfaction you experience during life on earth should be with a view to the kind of life in store for you after you have died. So what Sforno is doing is imposing his own belief in the afterlife on a text which is really about this life on earth and the rewards it offers. I wanted to draw attention to those verses because they came to mind as I was listening to David speak this week about those early days of his life in the UK. He was 14 when he said goodbye to his parents in Vienna and came on the Kindertransport to Dover Court. Dover Court was a camp near Harwich for refugee children aged 5 to 18. This report from the Women's Voluntary Services in January 1939 gives you some idea of what the camp was like. It was used, said the report, as a kind of clearing station for German and Austrian Jewish and non-Aryan refugee children until arrangements could be made for their future. The report continued, "The Nazi authorities are apparently only too glad to get rid of the children, with the exception of boys of 17 and over, whom they require for labor. They come into England in batches of varying numbers, 80 to 120. And then the author of this report goes on to offer the following assessment on the conditions at Dover Court, and I'll quote from this report. "The camp leaders are very keen, full of human kindness, vitality, and emanating a cheerful atmosphere. Great efforts are made to stress the future hopes of the children and so help them to forget the past. They seem wonderfully happy, considering all they have been through. The arrangements for heating, clothing, sanitation, and health were very good, and the occupation of time as regards leisure seemed fairly satisfactory for an emergency measure. Better organization for lessons and more variety in games would no doubt be possible over longer periods and in camps for boys or girls only." I'm not sure how long David stayed at Dover Court, but a month after he left Vienna, David's mother, who had been suffering from cancer, died. The next part of the story isn't totally clear to me, but it appears that his father, who was Polish-born, had paid a significant amount of money to an Orthodox Jewish man in London. Whether that was for his son or for himself, I'm not sure. David's father from Vienna, where he was still living, instructed his son to go to the house of this Orthodox Jewish man and reclaim the money so that it could be used to bring his father over to the UK. The man refused to give the money to the 14-year-old David, who was here alone and who, unlike some other children who came on the Kindertransport, had not been adopted or fostered by any Jewish or non-Jewish family. David's father was deported to the infamous 9th Fort in Kovno in Lithuania, Kaunas, where the Nazis liquidated the ghetto and shot nearly 10,000 Jews in October 1941. To this day, 83 years after David first came to this country, he blames himself for his father's death. "But you were only 14, his children tell him, even now. By the time he had redeemed the money from the man who had refused to give it back to him, it was too late." As I made my way down the stairs from the top floor flat where David lives and back out onto the street, the opening words of this week's Torah portion came to mind. "See this day, I set before you blessing and curse," and the echo from Nitzavim in Deuteronomy 30, which I quoted to you before. "See, I set before you this day life and prosperity, death and adversity. Choose life if you and your offspring would live. Who was that individual who withheld money from that young and vulnerable boy who was only 14 years old? Money that might have saved his father's life. One man living in relative safety here in the UK in 1939 chose to condemn another man to death and adversity instead of life and blessing. Mercifully, we don't have those extreme choices of life and death to make in our own lives. But knowing that a different choice could have saved David's father's life, help me to see that the choices we make will always have an impact on ourselves and on others. The smallest gesture, the kindest word, a charitable donation. We may not pay attention to these little things in our lives, but they matter. They can change lives. As the Torah says, "V'charta b'chayim," choose life so that you and your offspring will live.